The room was packed. Hundreds of eyes were on him. The air felt heavy, charged with electricity. Mel Gibson stared at the floor. For the first time that evening, he had no words. The question was simple, but it was also the hardest one he had ever been asked. In front of him stood a little girl, no taller than 4'3". Her face was illuminated by the warm light of the room. She clutched a Bible in her hands. Her voice was soft but firm. "Mr. Gibson, what does God mean to you?" Silence stretched. For a moment, it seemed even time itself had stopped. The audience waited. They watched him, studied him, expected his answer. But at that moment, he felt as if he were completely alone with that question, and he realized he could no longer avoid it. Half an hour earlier, that same room had been filled with voices. The sound of chairs being adjusted, the murmurs of people exchanging opinions, the faint scent of aged wood, worn Bible pages, and the sweet perfume of a lady sitting in the front row. Shreveport, Louisiana, a small southern town where faith isn't just a word, it's a constant presence. That night, people had gathered for a special event. Mel Gibson was there, the actor, the director, the man behind The Passion of the Christ, but more than anything, a man with a story to tell. His new film, Resurrection, spoke of faith, sacrifice, redemption. For many, it was just a movie. For others, a message, and for some, an opportunity to ask deeper questions. Among them was a little girl, sitting next to her mother, her back straight, hands neatly folded in her lap, Lily, 8 years old, a clean face, big, attentive eyes. She wore a blue dress with a white collar, carefully chosen for the occasion. In her arms, an old Bible with yellowed pages. It wasn't just a book, it was a piece of her history. It had belonged to her grandmother, the woman who had taught her about faith, the one who used to tell her about God before bed, who would say, "Lily, God doesn't always answer right away, but he's always there, listening." But her grandmother was gone now, and Lily had a question no one had ever been able to answer. That night, she wasn't there to hear about movies, she wasn't there to see a Hollywood star, she was there for an answer no adult had ever been able to give her. Meanwhile, the event had begun. Mel Gibson stepped onto the stage, the audience applauded, cameras flicked on. He started talking about his film, about the meaning behind his work. But Lily wasn't really listening. Her heart was pounding. She repeated her question in her mind like a prayer. "Will I have the courage to ask it?" Her mother squeezed her hand, a glance, a small nod, as if to say, if you want to, you can, but the right moment had not yet come. The questions kept coming, one after another. Journalists, fans, onlookers, some asked about the film, others about his career. A man in the front row leaned forward and smiled. "Mr. Gibson, what made you decide to make Resurrection?" Mel Gibson nodded slowly and answered in his steady voice. "It was a story that needed to be told. It's a powerful message. More than a film, it's a testimony." The audience nodded. Some took notes. Another man raised his hand. "Hollywood hasn't always been kind to those who speak openly about faith. Were you afraid of the backlash?" Gibson gave a small smile, a smile that said more than words. "I'm not afraid of backlash. I'm afraid of staying silent when I know something needs to be said." A quiet round of applause filled the room, but as the audience focused on Gibson's words, a small hand went up. At first, no one noticed. Then the moderator glanced down. A little girl. Sitting in the middle of the room, back straight, hands tightly wrapped around an old book, Lily. The murmuring softened. The moderator smiled. "We have a young guest with a question. Go ahead, sweetheart. You can speak." The microphone passed from hand to hand until it reached her. Lily took it with both hands. She felt the weight of the room's attention on her. Her heart pounded. For a moment, she thought about letting it go, but then she remembered her grandmother. Her words, "Lily, if something matters to you, don't be afraid to ask." She swallowed, clutched the Bible even tighter, then took a deep breath, and spoke. "Mr. Gibson, what does God mean to you?" The room fell silent, a thick, heavy silence, absolute. It was a simple question, but it struck like lightning. Some in the audience exchanged glances. A man near the exit crossed his arms and tilted his head. A woman in the second row lowered her gaze to her hands. Even the cameraman stopped adjusting his lens. Everyone was waiting for the answer. Mel Gibson didn't move. His smile faded. His gaze dropped for a moment, then returned to the little girl. He looked at the Bible she was clutching. The clock on the wall read 8:12 p.m. But to him, time seemed to have stopped. He opened his mouth to speak, then paused. He held the silence for a moment that felt endless. The audience held their breath. No one had ever seen Mel Gibson hesitate like that, and in that moment, everyone understood. This wasn't just any question, it was the question. Mel Gibson lowered his gaze slightly. Then he did something no one expected. He smiled. But it wasn't the confident, composed smile everyone knew. It was a tired smile, the kind that appears when a heavy memory suddenly resurfaces. The audience waited. Then, finally, he spoke. I haven't always known how to answer that question. His tone was different, lower, more sincere. As a child, I believed because I was told to believe. My family was very religious. We went to church every Sunday. We prayed before dinner. We said the rosary. But if I'm being honest, to me, it was just a routine. He paused, staring at some undefined point in front of him. As I grew older, life tested me, and I failed. Someone in the audience shifted in their seat. Hollywood is a strange place. It gives you everything and at the same time takes everything away. You're young, you're famous, everyone praises you, but then things change, and you start losing pieces of yourself. His eyes briefly landed on Lily. I've lived success, fame, glory, a short pause, but I've also lived the abyss. Someone in the room held their breath. There were moments when I lost everything, and I don't just mean my career. I mean myself. I found myself in dark places. I made bad decisions. I hurt people who cared about me. A man in the audience nodded slowly. And in those moments when everything was falling apart, I asked myself, where is God? The audience was completely absorbed. You know what the hardest part is, Lily? The little girl shook her head slightly. The silence. God's silence. The sound of a water bottle being opened at the back of the room suddenly felt like an explosion in the stillness. There were moments when I called out to him, searched for him, but I heard nothing. Nothing. It was like shouting into the void. Someone lowered their gaze. And when you don't hear anything for too long, you start convincing yourself that there's nothing there. He paused longer this time, then took a deep breath. And yet, he lifted his eyes. Even in my darkest moments, there was something pushing me forward. Lily's eyes lit up just a little. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a vision. It wasn't a sign from the sky. He paused again, then placed his hands on the table in front of him. It was just a feeling, like an invisible hand telling me, get up, try again. The audience was mesmerized. It doesn't happen all at once. It's not like in the movies. I didn't see a divine light. I didn't hear words from the heavens. But one day, without even realizing it, I started making my way back. Rebuilding, searching, believing. He turned to Lily, and I realized that God isn't the thunder. He isn't fire from the sky. God is the voice calling you, even when you think you can't hear it. He is the hand lifting you up, even when you think you're completely alone. A woman in the front row wiped away a tear. He is the breath that pushes you to take one more step, even when you think you have no strength left. He paused again, looking out at the audience. And that voice, Lily, his tone dropped, deeper, quieter. That voice never left me, and it will never leave you either. The silence in the room was absolute, and for the first time, Lily's eyes filled with tears. No one spoke. The silence was no longer just a moment of waiting. It was a silence that weighed heavy, that struck deep. Lily slowly lowered her gaze, her fingers tightened around the Bible. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then, slowly, a single tear rolled down her cheek. Not a desperate cry, not sadness. It was something bigger. It was the feeling of having heard something she had been searching for all along. The audience held their breath. A woman in the second row brought a hand to her mouth. A man further back wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Because it wasn't just Lily who had felt those words, it was all of them. Every single person in that room had, at some point, experienced that silence. Every single one of them had, at least once, wondered if God was still there. And that night, Mel Gibson's words had reached into that emptiness and filled it. Lily lifted her gaze. My grandma used to say that God is always with us, even when we can't hear him. Her voice was steadier now. Mel Gibson smiled at her. Your grandmother was a wise woman. Then a voice rose from the audience. A man sitting in the back rows spoke up. Mr. Gibson. He hesitated. His voice was uncertain, almost fragile. I lost my brother 2 years ago. Since then, I haven't been able to believe anymore. Why does God allow things like that to happen? The question was heavy. Mel Gibson didn't answer right away. He looked at the man, he saw his pain, then he spoke. I don't have a simple answer for you. No one does, and anyone who says they do is lying. He paused, then continued. But I can tell you what I've come to understand. God doesn't promise we won't suffer, but He promises we won't suffer alone. He promises that even in pain we can find purpose. The man nodded slowly, lowering his gaze. Another silence. Then an elderly woman raised her hand. Her voice trembled. I lost my husband last year. Since then I haven't been able to pray. I feel angry at God. Is that wrong? Mel Gibson stepped slightly closer to the edge of the stage. No. Faith isn't just made of certainty. It's made of questions, of doubts, of fears. Even anger is part of the journey. He paused, then added, but God doesn't get offended when you ask Him questions. God doesn't turn away if you're angry with Him. In fact, it's in those very moments that He is closest to us. The woman nodded slowly, another tear, another knot in the throat, finally untied. And then, without anyone deciding it, the audience began to clap. A slow, sincere applause, filled with emotion. But as the sound filled the room, Lily no longer heard it. She looked at Mel Gibson with a different expression now, no longer just with the curiosity of a child, but with something deeper, with the understanding of someone who had found an answer. And maybe that night, she wasn't the only one who had. Maybe even Mel Gibson had received an answer he hadn't known he was looking for. The applause continued. Some in the audience rose to their feet. It wasn't polite applause. It wasn't for the show. It was for the moment they had all just lived. But while the room was filled with sound, Lily remained still. She looked at Mel Gibson as if she wanted to say something, but didn't know how. He noticed, so he lowered himself, bringing his face level with hers. Lily, the little girl stared at him, her eyes still glistening. Did you find your answer? Lily lowered her gaze for a moment. Then slowly she nodded. Yes. And what is it? She took a deep breath. God never left me, even when I couldn't hear Him. Mel Gibson's smile was genuine, real. That's right. Then the little girl extended her small hand. Mel Gibson looked at it for a moment, and then he did what felt like the most natural thing in the world. He took it. And in that instant, in that simple handshake, there were no longer an actor and a child, no longer a stage and an audience. There were just two people, two souls, two journeys that for a brief moment had crossed paths. Then Mel stood up, looked out at the room, and took a step back. He scanned every face before him, and then he asked a question. And what about you? The audience fell silent. Have you found your answer? Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some lowered their gaze, but no answer was needed, because deep down they all knew that sooner or later, they too would face that same question, and that moment would come. Mel Gibson nodded slowly. Then he took a deep breath and said, You know, the world today tells us that believing is weakness, that it's better to be cynical, skeptical, indifferent. But I tell you this, faith is not weakness. Faith is the courage to believe even when everything tells you to stop. Faith is the strength to get back up, to keep searching, to never stop asking questions. And if you're here today, if you've listened to these words, then it means that you too have questions inside you. And that's okay, because God isn't just found in the answers. God is also found in the questions. The audience remained silent, but it wasn't the silence of discomfort. It was the silence of understanding. Mel Gibson took a step back. Then he lifted his gaze toward the crowd. And now I ask you something. What is God to you? What does faith mean in your life? Have you ever felt God's silence? And if so, how did you overcome it? A brief pause. Then he continued, Write it in the comments. Share your experience, because sometimes your story might be the answer someone else is searching for. A woman in the front row nodded. A man further back picked up his phone as if he truly wanted to write something. And in that moment, the conversation was no longer just between Mel Gibson and the audience. It was between each and every one of them. Mel gave one last nod. Thank you for listening. Thank you for asking. And remember, God is always closer than you think. Even when you can't hear Him. He offered one final smile. Then he turned and left the stage. But as he walked away, he knew those words would remain. In that room. In those people, and within himself. Before we close this gathering, I want to leave you with a question. And you? What is God to you? What does faith mean in your life? Have you ever gone through moments where you felt alone, abandoned, without answers? And if so, what helped you keep going? I invite you to share your story in the comments, because maybe today your words will be the answer someone else is searching for. This space isn't just for listening, it's a space for sharing, for reflecting, for growing together. And if this video made you think, if it touched something inside you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who might need it. A friend, a family member, anyone searching for answers, because sometimes a message arrives at just the right moment, and it can change everything. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for asking. And remember, God is always closer than you think, even when you can't hear Him. Thank you for watching. Share your story in the comments. Subscribe for more thought-provoking stories.